Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unparliamentary Language, a political podcast that knows if it rhymes, everything's fine. And how are you today, Rob?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I've got a bit of a cold, but hopefully not coming down with the worst of the lurgy that's going around. We're in those cold months where everything's a bit more of an effort, isn't it? Especially voting on deals in Parliament.
Yeah, certainly. I feel like I am enjoying the calm before the Brexit storm. So, enjoying my relaxing time before it all gets a little bit crazy again.
I think without any further ado, we'll just head on straight into this week's headlines. Is that all right with you?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, so headline quickfire. I'm going to start off with some positive stories, which is the thing we've been doing, because we're going to get bogged down in stuff. So I found a website called Positive News, and it has a UK section, and I thought that was quite nice. So just two positive news stories. One, UK contact lens recycling scheme launched. I think most people who have contact lenses just wash them down the sink. So the fact that you can now recycle them is probably a good thing. And the second one is a London supermarket becomes one of the first mainstream chains to introduce plastic-free zones. So I think that's moving all their packaging. There's been an ongoing discussion about packaging in our supermarkets everything being overly packaged, and it's nearly always wrapped in plastic, which doesn't necessarily recycle. So, yeah, just some nice news before we go properly into the headlines.
That's very nice and fluffy. I mean, I think you've gone for... Okay, so I will try to explain to our American listeners, but there is a show back in the UK called The One Show, which is famous...
Otherwise known as what?
Exactly. And it's famous for its sort of incredible segues and incredible jumps it does in tone. So they'll go... that's a lovely report from Giles Brandreth about puppies in Cornwall. Now we go to Christopher Biggins about genocide in Rwanda. And it jumps around the place so much that you don't know what to expect. So what I'm trying to say is good luck with this next story, Tom.
Yeah, so, as you've alluded to, we're going to segue quite massively here. This is something we felt we had to mention. There's not much to discuss at this stage. But yeah, we just have to mention it because it basically took over the headlines last week. So from The Guardian, Salmond accused of sexual assault and attempted rape. I suppose for the listeners, who is Salmond in this?
So this is Alex Salmond, the former leader of the SNP in Scotland, was very influential, as in he sort of spearheaded the SNP's rise during the 2000s and eventually led to Nicola Sturgeon being able to launch the campaign for a referendum to have an independent Scotland. His image was tarnished before this case came out, or before he was accused. I don't know if you remember when we recorded last time that the Scottish Parliament had come under a bit of fire because they'd mishandled the cases that were going on privately within the Scottish Parliament to investigate Salmond for something, for misdemeanours that we weren't quite sure at the time, and now it appears that that's gone out of the Scottish Parliament's hands and into criminal proceedings. Like you mentioned earlier, we don't know, and this is an ongoing case, so we can't really say any more, but I think it's particularly significant that a man who was at the forefront of Scottish politics for such a long time is going through charges like this, and I think it's even more remarkable that he continues to do his Russia Today segment. He's carrying on working as if nothing's happened. Again, like I always say with a couple of these things, it's just a story to look out for and see how it develops in the weeks to come.
Yeah, and I think, obviously they're pretty serious allegations that are levelled against him, and all we know, we don't necessarily know what that mishandling was, and I think before we didn't have enough information really about the kind of things he was being accused of. So at the time, people went, "Oh, is this someone trying to smear him or something?" And there was a lot of speculation, and now there are actual criminal proceedings underway, and we'll just have to see what happens from that. But yeah, it's worth mentioning because it was in the news, even though there's very little to say at this stage, other than there is an ongoing trial. So I think we're now going to move on to what is a fair amount of Brexit news, as you said up front. So I'm just going to come at you with headlines. So let's start with The Telegraph. PM's Plan B, Good Friday deal could be rewritten.
Yes, this is the story about the backstop. The backstop. All worry about the backstop. So we've talked about the backstop before, and I hope I don't need to explain it again, but very briefly, this is the idea that if the UK and Europe cannot come to an agreement about how they're going to sort out the Irish border and how goods and services will be transferred between the two, then the default position will be that Northern Ireland will essentially still be part of the EU and will operate under EU rules, and that may even spread to the UK in the whole. So, in short, Brexit might not happen if we are unable to come to a deal over how to get goods and services across the Northern Ireland border. So the idea that the Good Friday deal could be rewritten is because now there's a threat of a no deal. The EU says that the only way that they could manage goods going across that border would be the construction of a hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. This is something that the Irish Prime Minister has made comment on. Let me just get the BBC article up. So Varadkar has warned that troops could return to the Irish border, which would be sort of a significant step up in, a hard border between Britain and Ireland, and also, that would be in direct contradiction of the Good Friday Agreement, which states that there cannot be a hard border between the two. The Good Friday Agreement was something that came to pass in, I've forgotten the year now. I don't know if you've got the year there, Tom.
Not off the top of my head. It was one of the first things Tony Blair kind of did when he'd come to power. So it must be like 98, 99, I would think.
Yeah, 98.
There you go.
Yeah.
98. That's pretty close. I'm glad about my knowledge. I do remember that being on the news, though. Like, it was a big deal.
It was a huge deal because it marked the troubles which have been going on since the 1970s in Northern Ireland between the Republicans and the Sinn Féin Republicans, and then you've got like the DUP, who are I want to say nationalists, but unionists. That's it. Republicans and unionists who want to see Northern Ireland remain a part of the UK. The battles and bombings were going on, and people were losing their lives, and it was an area of sort of like significant violence up until then. I don't think I was really old enough to appreciate how big the troubles were back in the 70s. But it caused things such as Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister at the time, that the Brighton bombing was done as part of the Northern Ireland sort of like terror against the British government to try and get their attention. And, the Northern Ireland minister even had his car blown up and he was killed because of it. So it's a source of significant political and social strife, and the fact that a no-deal Brexit might bring this up again is worrying to many. So I think this article in The Telegraph is trying to suggest that the Good Friday deal could be rewritten to accommodate a hard border and still keep the peace. But my view at the moment is that that's quite unlikely to happen.
Yeah. And I think we are fortunate to be fairly distant from that. I mean, like, it was going on when we were children, but, it never affected us directly. It was a thing, like, I think we were dimly aware of because we were kids. I know my parents would, like, check under their car and stuff just in case. Because, there were bombings that weren't necessarily targeted at politicians. They were just, to cause, to carry on causing the troubles, essentially. I think you would get most people in the UK to agree that we don't want to lose the Good Friday Agreement. We don't want to go back to that stage. The idea of rewriting it seems fraught with issues because it was so hard to get agreement in the first place. Maybe because there's now been a time of relative peace, it would be possible. But yeah, it's not a good idea, I don't think.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I don't know if you heard the comment that John Humphreys made on Radio 4 in an interview about this very issue that upset a lot of Irish people.
I didn't hear that, no.
He suggested that, one solution to the problem would be Ireland to leave the EU. Because if Ireland left the EU, then that would solve all of the UK's Brexit problems, or at least a large part of them, because it would certainly solve the border issue.
I mean, yes, I can imagine no one in Ireland really wants to do that, given as they have the euro, etc., etc. It seems a bit of a silly suggestion.
Precisely. Your initial reaction of stunned silence, I think, said it all there, Tom, which was a reaction of most people when hearing that suggestion. It's like, yeah, it's possible, but yeah. So that is one proposed solution, but another one that I feel is unlikely to happen.
One of our listeners is Irish and said they think it would be very detrimental for their country. And I mean, I'm with you on that. I can't agree more. We've always been against Brexit. So, yeah, it's not a good idea, I don't think. So let's move on to our next headline, which is in The Times. May blames Corbyn as cross-party talks fail. So you may remember last time when we were chatting, there was Theresa May had said, I'm going to go talk to the other parties. We're going to come back with a deal. And we were a bit dubious of that, I think, how that would go. She seemed to at least be open to a discussion with the Labour Party, the SNP, and maybe she was going to play them off against each other to try and get an agreement. But it seems like nothing's come of that.
Yeah, this was one part of Theresa May's big sort of speech to reach across and say, right, if you don't like my deal, let's get all the parties around the table to talk about how we can proceed. The main reason why the cross-party talks have failed, and this is in my opinion, but I think so it's quite broad strokes, is that one of Corbyn's red lines was that the Prime Minister must take no deal off the table. So she must abandon the idea of that we're even going to pursue a no deal policy. And once she'd done that, then Corbyn would sit down and talk about the best way to go along with Brexit. Some see that as, perfectly sensible. There's certainly a majority of parliamentarians in the Commons who don't want no deal to happen. So that might be a path to getting enough MPs in total to get a deal passed. However, it's also one of Theresa May and the Conservative Party's red lines. I think the Conservative Party in particular worry that if you take no deal off the table, then you lose a potentially big bargaining chip with the EU. Some Brexiteers would stress that they think the threat of no deal would be certainly detrimental to the EU's prosperity as well as our own. So she's not going ahead with that. Corbyn was unwilling to go into those talks without that taken off, and as such, the cross-party talks broke down. They hardly ever happened. I think she had a meeting with the SNP and the Lib Dems, but the numbers that they have in the House wouldn't be enough to carry a deal, without Labour support.
So yeah, it's kind of leaves us where we were again. And I think that might be the summary of all of these headlines we're going to go through. That yeah, it seems like we're still at the same sticking points that we had last time, which is, I suppose, doesn't really make for great news.
Yeah, I've been trying desperately to find the tweet I wanted to. I can't, but just a little side note. Jeremy Corbyn is oft criticised for not talking about Brexit enough on his Twitter account. And he posted a picture where he said, I've just been to this curry house and I had a lovely time. So there's a picture of him and the owners of the curry house there. And one of the comments was that I said that I believed he refused to sit down unless they agreed to there was no dal on the table, which I thought was, that's a long walk for that joke, but I enjoyed anyway.
So more Brexit headlines. From the Financial Times, outspoken Brexit backer Dyson shifts company HQ to Singapore.
This story really does what it says on the tin. Jeremy Dyson is one of the big funders and supporters of Brexit back in 2005, and I think he even promoted it as he was exalting the business benefits of Brexit, the fact that you could have lower tariffs, maybe more trade to Britain, and it would make them freer, and he would be able to create more jobs in Britain as a result. This seems to be not the case, as he's decided to move his business to Singapore. In his defense, he said that he thinks it's sort of like just future-proofing the business and makes it more of a global technological company. But some of the more cynical members of the media probably, and myself included, would say that it sort of does. It shows a man who might be worried of the consequences of a no-deal Brexit and how that might affect his business. We've had a couple of other firms come out, as well as Dyson, sort of saying their worries around Brexit. I think Airbus was one in particular that wrote quite a strongly worded letter to the Prime Minister saying we're seriously going to have to look at moving our HQ abroad. And I keep seeing these tweets and I can't remember them, but I'm sure there was another company as well who's looking to move their business to Holland in the event of a no-deal Brexit. So as we've pointed out over the last year or whatever of podcasts, businesses are coming to a crunch point where they're having to make a decision, and the closer we get to that no-deal deadline, they're starting to have to make those decisions, and quite a few of them are deciding to move headquarters or move businesses overseas in case of a no-deal Brexit. If more companies follow suit, then we'll have to see.
So one of the big discussions we had during the Brexit referendum run up to it was about this. So, like, companies were saying, look, it's beneficial being in Europe for us in the EU. We're going to have to leave for various reasons. And a lot of Brexiteer, the faces of the campaign for Brexit being like, oh no, they won't do that. There's all these good British businesses, and they obviously trotted out Dyson and a few other people who are like, oh, I believe in Brexit. And I suppose that's why this one story is particularly galling, is that, he came out and was like, yeah, no, supporting British businesses, I think Brexit's a good idea. And then obviously he's leaving, even if that's a decision that's come about later. Like, it does seem, it is annoying if you're a member of the public that's what he's done. And then equally, like, as you said, with Airbus and stuff like that, all these companies said that up front, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, but people are still being like, about it. And you're like, yeah, what did you expect? It's exactly what they said they'd do. And now they're planning on doing it. Our next headline from The Independent: Labour MPs bid to force Corbyn into referendum.
Yeah, so this is the story that a group of about 3 Labour MPs have put a motion towards Jeremy Corbyn that will try to sort of rewrite the proposals that he's put forward for the next phase of sort of his Brexit strategy. Unsurprisingly, they've tried to tie him to a second referendum, a move that over 70% of the Labour conference voted in favour of back in 2018. And this remains to be a bit of a sticking point for Corbyn and his Brexit strategy. When challenged in public and when challenged just after the last vote, he was quite adamant that the referendum would only come after a general election, and the general election that he hopes that he would win, and then it would be put to a people's vote. This has been matched, and I've matched it with another story that has come under some contention. So there was a story in the Sunday Times that stated that Labour had lost around about 150,000 members since the start of this year, which is a huge amount for any party to lose. Labour still is, even if they did lose that amount of members, they'd still be the largest political party by membership by quite some way in the UK. However, it might suggest the disdain or the worry amongst Labour members that they are not following through with what they thought the party's direction was with the EU. This has been rebutted by the Labour Party, who say that the numbers are just plain wrong. I think they update the figures each year formally by Parliament, so we'll get to see the actual answer soon enough. I did some digging this morning, and I think the figures come out in about April, so we may find out what's happening there. But it certainly shows a divide in the Labour Party about where they want to go on Brexit. There's one interesting thing, or something at least I thought was interesting, about Corbyn's idea of a second referendum. So let me walk you through it. Corbyn says that he only wants a second referendum after a general election. So I believe Corbyn's plan would be to win the general election, renegotiate a Brexit deal that he's in charge of, and then put that to a people's vote. Now, in that instance, Corbyn would almost certainly be on the side of wanting Brexit because he'd be supporting the deal he's negotiated. And those that would be against Brexit would be a weird mixture of, I guess, Conservatives who might not like Corbyn's deal and Remainers who don't want to leave. So I'm not quite sure what his strategy is to win over Remainers if that's his process. Because whatever happens, I think Jeremy Corbyn is still committed to making Brexit happen. I don't believe he wants a no-deal Brexit. He's made that very clear, but he's still determined to carry out an exit from the European Union. And I don't know how he can win back those ardent Remainers that are certainly in the Labour Party who would like another chance to stop it.
I think my thoughts on that story about the numbers, I mean, as you say, we need to wait till April to see the actual numbers, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is some effect. I mean, because they had such a surge when there was talk of like, people are trying to stop Corbyn getting in, and there was a big surge of paying members of the Labour Party then. And I wonder if now that Corbyn's at the head of the party, some of those people are like, well, it's £5 a month to be a member, and they're cutting back. Like I wouldn't be surprised if there's a not insignificant number of people who kind of signed up to ensure they could get their vote for Corbyn. And then they're like, well, I don't really need to pay this much every month just to be a member of the party when what I want to happen is happening. And that might be part of that effect. Although we won't know until we see the actual numbers. Maybe it's a lot smaller than has been suggested.
Yeah, I totally agree. He's come from such a high number, and I think they were at 500,000, while the Conservatives were only at 120,000. So Labour is by far the biggest party, and Labour say that they are the biggest party in terms of membership in the whole of Western Europe. So they can afford to lose 50,000 members. If the Conservatives did that, they'd lose half. For Labour, it's a tenth. So that's how big the margins are.
Yeah, wow. I hadn't realised that it was quite so big. I mean, I knew Labour was bigger, but that's kind of shocking. I suppose that shows a difference in how they raise their money.
Yes, certainly.
So I think I'm going to put these two headlines together. From the Express, gear up for no-deal Brexit. And then The Times, Queen calls for end to Brexit feud. So kind of, again, I think we've discussed this before, the kind of ping-ponging of stories you get in the press. Well, I suppose I'll let you take it from here, but like a no-deal Brexit, and how does the Queen get involved in that discussion?
Yeah, I think when you have a parliament that's so divided and unable to function, particularly on the question of Brexit, as it is now, it's time for the one person who's above parliament, the Queen, to get involved and stick a roar in. Now, I must stress, constitutionally, the Queen has little to zero power to do anything. I think I mentioned that the General Election Act, that I can't remember now, but the one that says that we must have election every 5 years, completely
took... The Fixed Term Parliament Act.
Thank you, the Fixed Term Parliament Act, that's the one. Before that, the Queen maybe had a little bit of power to call a general election whenever she wanted. That was kind of her one trump card, or at least on the advice of people in Parliament. Now she doesn't even have that power. Parliament must vote before there is a general election. So the Queen can only use her soft power, which is her influence and her popularity within the country, to sort of try and persuade MPs to essentially get their act together and sort things out to get Brexit moving, or at least come up with something before we have a no deal, which is what the Express in this case is saying that the country should gear up for. Now, the Express is quite a Brexit favouring paper. There seems to be a trend amongst Brexiteers, and particularly on an episode of Question Time, which is a political discussion show in the UK, where the idea of no deal Brexit was loudly applauded by about a third of the people watching. That's a very unscientific poll, just clapping in the audience, but it appears that there's a die-hard group of people within the country who just want to see Brexit go through at any cost. They don't want it stopped at any stage. So this gearing up for no-deal Brexit has some momentum, particularly amongst Brexiteers, as a way to force it through, to make sure Parliament doesn't get involved.
I've forgotten his name, but there was a Labour MP talking in one of these articles I had a look into earlier in the week, a Labour MP saying that in his constituency, it was majority Leave, but there is obviously a large portion of people who voted Remain, and he was saying that there's a lot of people who voted Remain now saying, "Oh, let's get on with it, let's just get it done with. We've had the vote," and I don't know. I feel that doesn't sound necessarily truthful to me. I mean, there's a bit of me that just wants this all to be over and done with, but not at the expense of no deal. Like, I think there is a nuanced argument to be had about, like, we would like, the vote did happen. We're leaving the EU. I think there are many problems, as we've discussed, with having a second referendum and stuff like that. But it doesn't have to be a no deal. And I think that's like, I don't think many people went in voting for a no deal. And I definitely think there's a lot of people being like, no deal, because they've seen it in the newspaper, but they haven't actually really read into the consequences of it, which I think is a thing we've touched on before. So yeah, it's I mean, it'd be nice if the Queen could just click her fingers and stop things, but also, we probably shouldn't have absolute power invested in one person. So, I think in general, the fact that the Queen can't do that is a good idea.
Yeah. Just to add to that, if you look at papers like the Daily Star, which is owned by the same people as the Daily Express, but tends to go for a slightly more tabloidy demographic, they're often the one paper that doesn't have Brexit on its front cover and explicitly talks about it by saying, no Brexit in this paper, or, oh, not another Brexit story, move on. Like, as to say, oh, we're just fed up with it. We just want it to happen, but don't tell me any of the details. Just wake me up when it's done. So I I feel there's a lot of people within the country that paper sells. It obviously knows its market. There's a call from some people that just says, oh, I'm fed up with talking about it, as I'm sure you, dear listener, are fed up of me talking about it as well. But we have to strive on. And yeah, that feeling is permeating, or is at least having some momentum within the country. And that might be what's spurring on this gear up for no deal Brexit call.
A final headline before we go into our kind of main stories and a bit of chat that we want to have about amendments to the Brexit deal. From the Sunday Telegraph, Tory fury as election watchdog seeks police powers. So what's that all about?
Yeah, this is about the election watchdog who we've talked about, who have put some issues to MPs to look at regarding both the Vote Leave campaign and Conservative MPs in the past. I don't know if you remember the hashtag Tory election fraud that was around late 2016, early 2017, which focused around the elections in actually the Nigel Farage constituency, where it was alleged that the Conservatives had overspent in that constituency to make sure that they'd won, and in doing so had contravened election law, and maybe that election should be rerun. They also, the election watchdog pointed out irregularities in the Vote Leave campaign and how it was funded. I think the allegations there were that the money went through a much younger member who was part of a sort of a sister campaign. But when you looked into it deeper, the funds were being directed from Vote Leave into another campaign on the side, and that contravened election law, and therefore Vote Leave should be fined. Or, as some people may have hoped, particularly Remainers, maybe that made the whole vote invalid in the first place and it would have to be rerun. The point of this story is that Conservatives in particular are worried that if they are given police powers, the election watchdog wouldn't merely refer these concerns to a parliamentary committee who would discuss it and then decide whether the allegations were true or false. It would just go straight to criminal proceedings. And they are worried that the election watchdog has a bias against Conservative and against pro-Brexit views, and that would make it more likely for them to fail in the future.
But I mean, surely the point of the election watchdog is it should be relatively impartial.
Precisely, and as I said, who decided, who does it refer to? It refers to a parliamentary committee, which, by the nature of parliamentary committee, will have a majority of members from the party who's in power, who at this time is the Conservatives. So I would argue that that was a less neutral way to look at electoral law, and that police proceedings probably is the way to proceed. So there's one for you to discuss and, look at the morals of that. But I think it's interesting that this story is coming from the Telegraph, and it is the Conservatives who are having concerns when the majority of a election misdeeds have been alleged against the Conservative Party and Vote Leave recently.
So I know before we went into talking about Trump, which is our main story tonight, you wanted to have a quick talk about some amendments to the votes that are happening tomorrow, which will probably be today as this recording goes out.
Yeah, so I know this is very close to the deadline, so these votes probably will have already happened by the time you're listening to this, but just to give a brief overview, there are two key amendments that may go forward on the Brexit votes on Tuesday. So one is pro-Brexiteer, it comes from a Conservative called Brady, and this is a move that looks to remove the backstop entirely from the legislation. And it's an amendment that is backed by Theresa May. The Brexiteer logic behind this is that we remove the backstop from the thing we agreed with the EU. That gets enough Brexiteers on board for our deal to pass, and it also crucially would get the DUP on board, which is who Theresa May really needs on side to get it through. Once that's passed, Theresa May goes to the EU and says, look, I've got a deal, just sign on the dotted line. Now, that's when the EU might have to turn around and go, no, our deal had a backstop in it. You've been very naughty here. But it does put the ball in the EU's court, and it makes the EU the bad guys, not the Conservatives, who look vaguely incompetent for being unable to put this deal through. So, yeah, that's the Conservative master plan.
And then on the other side with Labour, do you have Yvette Cooper?
Yes, and her amendment says that If the deal fails, then Parliament is automatically given the right to put a 9-month extension on Article 50. So kicks the can down the road, makes sure they've got more time to negotiate, doesn't take no deal off the table completely, but at least it gives everybody more time, which is what a lot of people feel that Parliament needs at the moment. This one, again, I think that last week it looked like it may get support from the front bench and from Jeremy Corbyn himself, which was what this amendment would need if it was to pass. However, I think I read an article in The Guardian published just 2 hours ago where they seem to suggest that hope is fading, essentially because Corbyn won't support it. It's seen as a bit risky for Parliament to take back control in that sense and delay Brexit. It might make Labour look like the bad guys for the Brexiteers and for people who just want to get on with Brexit, and that might be something that would damage Jeremy Corbyn in an election if it was to happen within the next 9 months, which he obviously cares about. So those are the two to look out for. I'm not really sure if either will pass, or if the deal will pass in general. I think the general feeling is that Plan B is awfully similar to Plan A. There have been no concessions from the EU, particularly on the issue of the backstop, and I feel the most likely conclusion is that the deal fails again, and then we've really got some questions to answer, but I'll leave that until next time.
I will try my best to find it for the show notes. I know it was posted on Reddit. There was, I think it was the Times cartoon, which was Theresa May with holding up, saying, "Oh, here's my Plan B," and it's Plan A with a pair of novelty glasses and a moustache on.
Yes, sums it up very well.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our main story for tonight. You may have noticed we've been talking a lot about Brexit because it is very much on our minds and a big story over here. But also the other big story that just keeps on happening is Trump. So, yeah, what's going on over there? Well, we mentioned the government shutdown. I think it's probably the big piece of news is that has now stopped after 35 days, which is the longest shutdown in history. I'll throw a link into the show notes actually for a Planet Money episode where they talked about the first shutdown, which was much shorter. As I say, it's over, but what happened? How have they worked out a deal? Because it very much looked last week like no deal was going to happen.
In short, Trump has taken a step back, and I think he's noticed one big thing is that his disapproval and approval numbers were going in the wrong direction. So I will see if I can find the link to my favourite site, 538.com. So the old 538, how popular is Donald Trump tracker. You can see it's gone up and down, but the big point is that if you look at it at the start of the shutdown, or just before December 17th, December 18th, his disapproval is at 51.7 and his approval is at 42.5. And as the shutdown has got longer and longer, you've seen those numbers go in opposite directions. So now disapprove is at almost 56%, whilst only 39.7% approve of Donald Trump.
It's interesting, actually, that, I mean, this is something where I would have expected he would have got to his worst level of disapproval. Or, well, the highest level of disapproval, therefore the worst level of approval. But looking back, he hasn't quite hit the peak of the 28th of August, 2017. So I'm not exactly sure what he was doing then that was so bad, because this feels like it's been a much bigger story, but maybe that's just because it's gone on for 35 days.
I believe that was the Comey firing that was the which saw the big dip in his approval ratings.
Right, okay.
I think that was many people feeling that that would be his steps to sort of stop the Mueller investigation and, put that into his own hands, and people were very worried that that was the direction he was taking. He didn't in the end, and that fizzled out a bit more, but I think it's fair to say that there's a very strong correlation in this graph, and it shows it over quite a long period of time, almost a month, the longest shutdown that we've had, that it was certainly people were placing the blame squarely at the feet of Donald Trump for causing this shutdown, and placing the issue of the wall as something that he must get done and he must get through.
And I think an interesting thing that was mentioned on Left, Right and Centre is this feels like the very first time that maybe some of his base has been eaten into, because there are Republican voting government workers who've had their paychecks withheld. They will now all get paid because government's reopened. But over Christmas, that's the word. I mean, I think we mentioned it last time. I couldn't survive not having a month and a bit paycheck. If I suddenly was told, oh, we can't pay you for a month and a bit, I'd have to find a different job. And I know it's the case that, I think it's been mentioned before, but it's something like the majority of Americans don't have $200 in savings to hand. So that kind of shows the situation people could be in, and it was getting worse and worse with people from the TSA just not turning up for work, claiming illness, but essentially just not turning up for work because they weren't being paid. So yeah, it's interesting that everyone was saying his base is super strong, but it sounds like maybe that had an effect on his base, and then that affects how we have to think about future elections. I mean, this was a failure, but do you think he's going to bounce back from this, or do you think that's going to leave a sour taste in everyone's mouths?
So it's a wait and see moment about if he can bounce back with a new deal. So he's stopped the shutdown for now and allowed workers to get paid, because I think that he thinks that was the main thing that was getting him the disapproval rating, the fact that people weren't getting paid. He still thinks the wall's a great idea and hasn't stopped on any of that, and his Twitter account and everything will show you that he's still as fervent about that as he ever was. The wall is also a very strong, thing for his base. It's what got him the support. It was a big campaign slogan during the election, and there was a worry amongst his core support that when he stopped the shutdown, that he was backtracking from the wall. He didn't think it was realistic, and the short-term articles I saw coming out of that is like, oh my goodness, is Trump abandoning his base? Or people within the base say, oh no, Trump's abandoning us. What do we do? What do we do now? Where do we go with our vote? I think Trump, either by accident or design, has tied his fate to the fate of this wall, and it's entirely based on this, whether he will bounce back and get the support he needs from his base to carry the presidency through, or sort of fail entirely. If they try and do a deal and it breaks down again, and Trump is unable to pin the blame on the Democrats for the government shutting down again, then I think things will probably only get worse for Trump in the short term.
That's the less popular song by D-Ream. Things can only get worse.
In the short term. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, so a bit of wait and see. Another thing we've been waiting and seeing about is the Mueller probe that's been going on for some time now. There were some big developments in that in the was it last week? I think it was the last week. At least since we last recorded anyway, there have been big developments because another one bites the dust.
Yeah, this is Roger Stone, who, although not sort of officially tied in with Trump and the campaign, was a advisor to Trump quite heavily during the 2016 presidential campaign, and was seen by Paul Manafort himself. That there's a clip going around the internet of Paul Manafort saying that Roger Stone and Donald Trump, it's hard to know where one starts and the other ends. They're so alike. They are, peas in a pod. They work together, and Roger's views are the same as Trump's. So tying Trump to a man who's just recently been convicted by Mueller of several offences has made some people feel that the net around Trump and possible misdeeds by him, it is getting closer, and that may lead to a possible impeachment of Trump, definitely if he's done anything criminally wrong.
And Paul Manafort also got convicted, right? Was that also in the last 2 weeks? Or
Yeah, he's going to get convicted. We'll get to know his sentence. I think he was tried once, and then it was found out that he lied to the Mueller probe, so they are reinvestigating that conviction, see if it should be lengthened at all. Paul Manafort's defense is that no, I just, I misremembered and I didn't mean to mislead you. I'm sorry, but we'll see what comes of that. But given his track record, I can see why Mueller might be suspicious of his motives. So yeah, there's a lot of things going bad for Donald Trump at the same time as the shutdown, and I think the Roger Stone arrest happened earlier on the day where later Trump would announce that he had agreed a deal to get federal workers paid by the end of that. So there may be a case of burying bad news.
We have a question from the chat, which is just some clarification. Was Paul Manafort convicted, indicted, or charged?
Oh, that's a good question, which I don't necessarily know the answer to. To Google. He was charged as guilty on 8 counts, and Mueller's office has no current plans for new charges against him. I think he's just awaiting sentencing. So that's it. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know enough about the difference between those, but to go into any detail, so apologies for
that. Fair enough. So other stuff that's happened in since we last properly talked about Trump. There was a BuzzFeed article. What was all that about?
Yeah, this sort of blew up and then died down very quickly again. So in essence, the BuzzFeed article was saying that they knew that Michael Cohen, the President Trump's former lawyer, who is under criminal investigation himself, and I believe has pleaded guilty to quite a few counts of fraud and doing other things. BuzzFeed said that they had got confirmation from somebody within Mueller's inner circle that Cohen had told prosecutors that Trump had directed Cohen to lie under oath when Cohen was testifying before Congress. If true, then that's illegal. That's something that is a criminal offense. You can't tell your lawyer to lie on your behalf to try and fudge things. I think the thing that he was accused of lying on Trump's behalf for were the dates of Trump's proposed Moscow Trump Tower. I think that they said the plans for Trump's Moscow Tower were meant to be cancelled in January, or that very early in 2016 was what Cohen was forced to say, but it's alleged that it went much deeper into the campaign, maybe even until July, when those plans were finally cancelled, and that some members of Trump's inner circle, including Ivanka and Donald Trump Jr., also had knowledge that the Trump Tower Moscow was still underway and there were plans for it to be built. So the assumption there is, one, Trump has done something illegal and that he can be charged by it, and two, it brings up the ghost of Russia again. To get a Trump Tower built in Moscow, you would need to have close contact with the government. That might be Putin, the alleged sort of things between Russia and collusion between the investigations. That would bring another sort of ghoul that President Trump has been trying to shift. It would reappear.
But there was a retraction, right, with this BuzzFeed article? Am I right in thinking that? Or have I got these confused with something else?
No, you're absolutely right. So the retraction that happened, or at least the rebuttal that came from, so major news channels like CNN went ahead and said, whoa, hold the horses, we haven't had this verified yet, we're not happy to run with this story. And then Mueller came out himself and said that the BuzzFeed article was untrue.
And that's a big move, because he's basically said very little about this process, right? He's essentially not said anything that he didn't have to say.
Yeah, so he obviously saw this, felt he had to say something on the matter. Some people might say that, the BuzzFeed article may have been 95% true, and that there are some things that, I think maybe Mueller's words were something along the lines of, it's not all true, which may suggest that, where's the line between that? What have they misheard? And this, that, and the other. But with BuzzFeed having to retract the article and Mueller coming out against it, it did play into Trump's fake news line he can use against the media. He can say, the media's against me, they're making up stories, and look, everybody got excited. The left is so, interested in seeing me lose that they'll just make up stories to try and get rid of me. So he may have seen that as a welcome distraction during the shutdown, but it certainly doesn't look good, particularly when followed up with the Roger Stone arrest. It still shows you that the Mueller investigation is still very much ongoing and appears to be moving closer and closer into Trump's inner circle. So I think I've talked about how Trump's failed, or at least seems to have failed. So the way that Donald Trump has tried to deflect this is by boasting about his achievements. So we all think Trump's doing badly at the moment, but what can he claim he's done well, and how much of it is directly linked to Trump? I saw this tweet earlier, and I thought it was a great example of how Trump thinks. After all that I have done for the military, our great veterans, judges, 99, justices, 2, tax and regulation cuts, the economy, energy, trade, and much more, does anyone really think I won't build the wall? Done more in first 2 years than any president. Make America great again. To take that point by point and say how much is actually due to Donnie and how much is just circumstance. So military and veterans, very vague. Some may even say that he has, his decision to take troops out of Syria was something that was rebutted by many people in the military. He's certainly been a favour of, military and veterans' rights. But to that point, I would say what president isn't? Most presidents see that as a good vote-winning measure and go for it. Judges 99 and justices 2. So
I was going to ask you about that because that's like a very specific number. So presumably justices is the Supreme Court justices.
Which I wanted to point out is totally luck.
Yeah. It's complete luck that he had the chance to fill in 2 because it could have easily been his entire term with no Supreme Court justices.
Exactly. So I don't know how we can take claim for that, but still, he's going on. Tax and regulation cuts, fair enough. I think it's fair to say that was a big Republican move that had support within the House and Congress and got through, and was one of Trump's, at least from a conservative point of view, was seen as a big success. It was a conservative doing what a conservative should do, and that's cutting taxes. We've touched on previous episodes about how that might actually be very bad and is bringing up the federal deficit by quite a lot. But he sees that as linking to the next point, the economy, which has been doing fairly well under Trump. Some may say that that's more down to the strong foundations Obama placed, and that Trump just happens to be, again, he's a president that happens to be enjoying a good economy.
Yeah, I think when we've just talked about that before, we have wondered. I mean, he's now been there 2 years, over 2 years, just. So initially, the fact that he had a good economy is clearly because there was a good base to build on. There'd been reduction in unemployment and stuff under Obama, and there was a delay effect. But the question is now, 2 years in, how much of that was a delay from stuff Obama had done, and how much has been helped? Because there definitely has been effects on the stock market from Trump coming in. Like, it was generally an upsurge to start with, and it looks like the stock market has generally been going up, but also overall the world is still recovering from the global recession, so that's helping. It's one of those things where there are so many factors that you can't easily pick it apart, and I think people will be arguing over it. Well after the Trump presidency has been and gone, people will be arguing about this effect, because it's never something you're going to be able to put a finger on, I don't think. I think you can say that he had an effect one way or the other, but you can't say that the entire benefit to the economy at the moment is down to him or any one factor. It's just too big a system.
Yeah. What I would say is that usually if you are a president at a time of a booming economy, you should be seeing a higher approval rating than you have now. And that might show, despite how well the economy's doing, Trump's own personality is sort of bringing his approval rating down in that aspect. The next, energy, I'm not quite sure what he means. I think he might be referring to sort of the move back to coal and fossil fuels.
Yeah, that was a thing he talked about. I have no idea how much of that has actually happened. It's not something I've been really paying attention to, if I'm honest.
No, but it might be something that a lot of people, certainly if you are not a Republican, would say that has been a policy failure, particularly when you look at climate change and how much Trump seemed to not care about that issue. The return to coal is certainly, it would be a bad thing in your eyes. Trade he touches on as well, which he might be able to take some credit for. He's renegotiated the North American Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, and that was one of the big things he pledged to do. So he certainly followed through with that one. The vague statement and much more does make you think he's achieved a lot, but personally I think that he ran out of things to say once he got to this point.
I was just going to say on trade, I feel like, yes, you mentioned a few things that he has done, but I definitely feel like that's been a mixed bag with the whole trade war with China and back and forth like that.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I should have mentioned the trade war. You're absolutely right. That's caused turmoil and, caused the stock market to crash, didn't it? Around about Christmas, where most people tend to see a boost just before December, it dipped a fair bit. So, yeah, I think the trade wars and how those will end, we've still yet to see the full effect of what those will have. So that's Trump's achievements, which I think where he's done a fairly little within those 2 years. So now he moves on to say, does anybody think I really won't build the wall? Sort of saying that
I've achieved all these things, therefore I must achieve the next thing.
Which is bizarre, and something that I think he's certainly tying his whole presidential legacy to. I don't think within the next 2 years he will get the wall built. And that may be when he leaves office. But I don't even think if he got the funding approved that the wall would be finished by the time, in 6 years' time, when feasibly Trump would be forced to leave the White House by, sort of the length of his tenure there. I think it's a really strange thing for him to get obsessed by when it seems to when he knows the Democrats have control of Congress for the next 2 years and have flat out refused to even negotiate any funding for it.
But should we be surprised? This is a man who builds massive buildings with his name on them.
Yeah, but I thought he at least had a bit of common sense in there. The art of the deal, as he discussed, is about making compromises. He's got an opponent now who won't compromise on one thing. He has to come to an agreement to make something work. He hasn't got the good faith of anyone within Congress, or particularly amongst any Democrats, for them to sort of come across the table and go, I might not agree with you, but come on, for the good of the country, let's get this going. No, they feel that people can now place the blame on Trump. If he keeps on with this wall idea, people will keep blaming him for not getting paid. So his popularity will fall if he continues down his path. That would be my judgment for the next 2 years.
We've talked about that, but it says done more in first 2 years than any president. Now, I think he claimed a similar thing about his first 100 days, and he did less in his first 100 days than Barack Obama did. I don't know off the top of my head, but I have a feeling he hasn't done more in the first 2 years of his presidency than any president. Maybe than some, but probably not than any.
It's a bizarre claim, and I think it's one he made to the UN and got openly laughed at. Do you remember that last year? He made a big speech to them and they went instantly realised that was wrong. It's something that he likes to say. I'm not surprised he said it. He said it lots of times previously. I believe Donald Trump is a big believer in the fact that if you say it enough, it becomes true. And he's not been backing down from saying that anytime soon, and I think he will continue to say it in spite of the facts. So, talking about things Donald Trump likes to say in spite of the fact, I will move on to his new catchy slogan for the wall, which is, build a wall, crime will fall. Now, what do you think about that statement, Tom? Do you think it's true?
I mean, I don't think, personally, I don't think there's going to be much of a link between the wall and crime. I get that it's a thing that tends to happen where, the numbers are clear on this, that the majority of crime is not caused by immigrants. And in fact, when you have more immigrants coming in, there tends to be less crime. There are numbers out there, they're very good, and that's not just a set of US numbers, they've been replicated in other countries. So it's a big thing where people play on this fear that crime is related to immigrants coming in because they are that they are other to us, they're not us. And it seems particularly weird in a country that's based on the idea of accepting everyone. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that makes any sense personally. If anything, build a wall, crime will go up, which doesn't rhyme, but
Well, that's my point. So what I'm going to say is that Trump might not be the best at getting things done, but he is a good marketer and has some strategies, been able to sell some things in the past. So what's the more convincing slogan? Build a wall and crime will fall, or build a wall and you will see a significant reduction in the amount of crime? Which is the more appealing to you?
I mean, definitely build a wall, crime will fall. And I see you've got a link there to a Wikipedia article about how when you make something into a rhyme, people are more likely to believe it.
Yes. Basically, without even considering, even if it's not true, the example in the Wikipedia article is, for what sobriety conceals, alcohol reveals. Was judged to be more accurate when surveying people than when the same statement but less catchy was done to different participants who had the phrase, what sobriety conceals, alcohol unmasks. And it's this feeling that, things that are fluid and things that rhyme must be true, that Trump is playing on to try and win the public round. I think now he knows, with that slogan in hand, he knows that he's lost the battle within Congress. He's not going to convince those in the House or those in the Senate that the wall is a good idea. But what he may be able to do is build a base in 2020 and say, look, if you still think the wall is a good idea, vote for me, make sure I get a majority in both the House and the Senate, and then we can look at building this wall. That's the only path he has now to build this wall realistically, is if he gets a majority in 2020. If he can't do that, then it is dead.
And I think just one thing I want to touch on, mostly so I can bring up this amazing Facebook post from an engineer, a wall engineer. He wanted a wall, and it now looks like he's lowered his ambitions to quite a big fence. And then this engineer, she wrote this amazing Facebook post that went viral, talking about why it wouldn't work. And I think it's worth putting into the show notes purely for the quote, "Am I an expert on walls? Yes, I am literally an expert on walls." Which is pretty amazing. Like she brings up all her credentials beforehand and then just goes piece by piece through why this particular wall design is just a stupid waste of money. Which sounds very much like the kind of thing Trump likes. A big waste of money with his name on it.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me have my little rant on Trump. I know we've done more Brexity stuff in the past, but I thought it was worth bringing up again what's going on in America, and how politics is still interesting over there, and it might be at its most dysfunctional. I think when you're looking at the UK, we've had a very dysfunctional period of government. America shut their down for a while, so at least we're pairing up our dysfunctions in a way, but there is a little bit of a crisis of democracy in the wider Western world at this period in time.
And now, before we leave for the evening, our quick polls update. So, essentially, the Conservatives, if you look at the average of the polls, November, Conservatives were up by about 3%, nearly 3% on Labour. Sorry, slightly over 3% on Labour. And then mid-November, Labour and the Conservatives the Conservatives come down and Labour goes up slightly, and they're basically on the same by the 19th of November. So that will be Theresa May's deal being presented, right? Mid-November. And then since then, they've stayed fairly, like they're almost tied together. I'm going to make a screenshot of this just to show you what I mean. Like, it's crazy how flat they are. But in the last two polls, Labour have had a slight lead, which is contrasted with end of December, where there seemed to be a lot of Conservative-based polls. There's a string of YouGov polls, two with the Conservatives on +6, and that seems to have dropped, although the Conservatives did have +5 from a YouGov poll in the middle of January. What are your thoughts on all that?
It appears to me that the Conservatives were very strong before the Brexit deal went ahead, before we had the Brexit vote, and even after the vote of no confidence in the government, after they won that, there appeared to be a little boost to the Conservatives' power, bizarrely, because the fact they survived, and governments tend to have a little boost. People going, oh, right, okay, we've hit the reset button, we now know that Labour can't do it, right, let's roll our sleeves down and get moving. However, now things have stalled a little bit. Labour have taken a bit of a lead. We've been saying it for a long while that Labour and Conservatives have been neck and neck. But one little trend I have noticed is if you look into the detail of the polls where Labour are ahead, and if you look into the details of the polls where the Conservatives are ahead. So where the Conservatives are ahead, the Lib Dems tend to have slightly higher numbers of about 10 or 11, 12, there or thereabouts. In general, the more Labour supporters who seem to get disaffected with them, and I assume that they would move towards the Lib Dems, particularly if they are Remain supporting, then that helps the Conservatives in turn, because the two parties are so close together. However, when UKIP does a little better, so UKIP, who I thought were dead in the water a long while ago, now there's the possibility of no-deal Brexit or the threat of a second referendum, and some people thinking that Brexit won't happen at all. People who then have lost their faith in the Conservatives to deliver Brexit and move to UKIP, that seems to help Labour, who overtake the Conservatives. So ironically, if you're supporting the Lib Dems, that heightens the chance of a more Brexity Brexit, because Conservatives have a better chance of winning a general election. Or if you support UKIP and want a harder Brexit, you're more likely to get a softer Brexit in terms of Labour. So, very confusing poll landscape at the moment. People maybe not really getting what they wanted to get.
I think one thing that I find interesting, though, is that the Conservative numbers still seem like they seem to fluctuate less. And it is that Labour, depending on who they're talking to, who they're polling, Labour either has a big upswing or a big downswing. whereas the Conservatives sit around 38% all the time. You have like Labour going from 41 is the best I can see, and 34 is the lowest, which is a range of 7, whereas the Conservatives have a range of about 4, which is interesting. I don't know if that's just because the polls poll very different populations. Like, does YouGov concentrate more on the countryside where there's more Conservative voters? I don't know. But there's clearly a difference in methodology, because like the YouGov one consistently polls the Conservatives higher, for example. So I don't know what's going on there, but it's interesting that it's not. The Conservatives just seem to stay at a steady rate, and then it's whether Labour fluctuates, affects whether they're ahead or not.
Yeah, my suspicion and what I know from the last election in 2017 was that some pollsters took into account that the reason the Conservatives were polled so highly at the last election was that pollsters said that, the young don't traditionally vote, or this section of people who are non-voters, we count their opinions less because they're less likely to affect a general election, if that makes sense. Even if they say, I never usually vote in a general election, I might vote Labour, they weight that at 0.5 of a vote, compared to somebody who says, I vote in every general election and I've always voted Conservative. They go, right, that's a solid 1. So that might be showing the difference. Some polls might be boosting Labour in the sense of, well, a lot of people voted for them in 2017, and as unexpected, we should rank our coefficient to say that youth voters are valued higher than they usually would be, to take that into effect. So that might be why the Labour figures are fluctuating more.
Yeah, so I think it was nice to take a bit of a break from Brexit. It's always good to discuss something different, and we had that opportunity because, as you said, there's been a bit of breathing room before the storm of Brexit hits us once more. And yeah, I mean, sometimes it is nice to look over at America and see what Trump's doing and feel not so bad about Brexit. I know that this is reciprocated by some of my American friends that I've chatted with about politics, where they've said, "Oh, it's great to not have to have a break from Trump and watch you destroying yourselves over with Brexit." So the feeling's mutual. It is nice to distract ourselves from the problems in our own country every now and again. If you want to support us, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/TTSS, where you can support all of our shows. You can go to Reddit at /r/unparliamentary and discuss the episodes. You can go on to Facebook and find us at Unparliamentary Language. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at UnparlPodcast. And as I always mention, you can come and join us and listen to us recording live if you join us on Discord. And Rob and I are there, happy to chat about things. It's not just during recording time. If you have some questions, and also if you have ideas, we're open to suggestions. And I suppose we need to start thinking about summer silly season. It's a bit of a way off, but those episodes take a bit more research. So anything that you want us to talk about come summer, send them our way. Tweet them at us. Come and tell us on Discord. We don't mind any of those. And I suppose that's it from me. So it's good night from me,
and it's a good night from him.
Bye.
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 China. Okay, yeah.
So that's a new thing that's going on in the background, and I can feed back to the dev whether it works for us. But it looks like it's working. I don't know if you have a nice little audio pattern appearing on your screen, but I do.
I do, yes, and it's just asked me for the first 4 numbers of my PIN and my mother's maiden name, so I've given it that
good,
as well.
Good.